I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Our guest in this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, founder and director of Scientists Warning and self-appointed host of extraordinary media coverage at recent IPCC COP conferences, Stuart Scott. Stuart has a well-deserved reputation for digging for the truth about our climate change predicament and interviewing the experts and activists that are calling for global action now. Stuart Scott, it is great to be talking with you. And I just want to officially kick off this particular episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I'm Dean Walker, and we're early in the month of February 2019. Yet another year it promises to be of extraordinary indicators of the collapse of Earth and human systems as we know them. And Stuart, it's really a joy for me to be talking with you because unfortunately, I think you and I are part of a rare flock of birds on this planet. People who are have been cracked open one way or another to access what is our own truth about what we're seeing, what we're experiencing in this life on Earth. And I can say that I followed your work for quite a while. And yes, in just a few moments, I'd like you to introduce yourself and give me a little bit of chronology, because all I really know is the different ways that you've introduced yourself in your many, many important videos over the years. And but I'd like to start with just an acknowledgement of your current wave of work.
Thank you.
Which, you know, you've very deliberately implanted yourself in various COP meetings over the past few years, and in not just a passive observational way, you've really put yourself in a leveraged media location that none of the majors put themselves in, to speak with people who have something to say that is actually relevant to the condition of the planet and humanity right now.
Yeah.
And particularly this round, you know, I think you got this round of synergy this year by connecting primarily with Greta Thunberg, who, you know, of course, is just so virally and gorgeously affecting our world.
God bless Greta Thunberg.
Indeed. So I guess what I'm doing is giving my own rather subjective introduction of how I know you to the people who might be watching this podcast. And you know, before we get going and get to talking about all the things we'll talk about and so on in rapid fire fashion, because I think we're both that way, I'd like to just slow down for a moment and let you know that, excuse me.
Yeah, I do it all the time, man. I choke up, I go to tears at the drop of a hat.
I know.
When we get our head around, our heart around what we're facing, what our job is within this task, it's overwhelming. It's
yeah. So that's exactly what I was hoping to articulate in my sharing right now, on my introduction of my experience of you now. And that is, I so deeply appreciate the openness with which you share your broken heart.
Yeah, thank you.
So it so resonates with mine as well. And with the extraordinary quality of work that you've been putting out, as we all know, speaking truth to power in these times, well, really at any time, but especially these times, is It could be dangerous.
It could get you killed. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And it's at the very least um, one of the most vilifying processes I've ever been a part of, you know, to lose friends and family and relationships because of my
Because
desire.
people don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear. I mean, people in the developed world don't want to hear what our collective lifestyle is doing to the planet.
Yeah.
And they don't want to hear that it's basically ending their children's lives prematurely.
Yeah. So this has been a little less smooth than I might have liked, but I hope you get my deep appreciation and resonance with you as a brother, as a co-traveler on this very rugged path that we're both walking, and so unfortunately few of us are walking. And again, just a deep pleasure to be speaking with you today. And I hope this is just the first of many times we get a chance to compare notes, because we have slightly different paths, but addressing the same core issues.
Yeah.
And so, Stuart, welcome here, and whatever you're sparked to say to continue, but then eventually, if you would just introduce yourself and how did you get into this line of work anyway?
You know, I consider it karma. I consider it kind of my fate. I tell people, if you want to go way back to where it started, my parents named me Stuart before I was born. And the derivation of the name from Old English is the one who takes care of the land, the steward. And so that's my job, you know, and it's been a thread in my life since the earliest days. And as my dad used to say, everything you've done and been in your life becomes part of what you are now. And so even my being a magician, I was a stage magician when I was 14, gave me the ability to sense the mood of an audience. And I say mood because it's something we can understand, but it's, in my experience, it's way more than mood. I mean, you can actually connect with the ideas, the emotions, and the thoughts of what's going on in your audience, and speak to them if you're clear, if your own mind is silent to some extent. So in any case, I've been trying to get traction for decades on anywhere along the line on what used to be called environmental issues, but now they're still called environmental issues, but I no longer call them environmental issues because it's too limited a way of framing what the problem is. If you're talking about environmental problems, you're talking about air pollution. Oh yeah, well, we all live with that. You gotta, you know, it's part of it. And we're talking about water pollution, and we're talking about this, and we're talking about all of the organizations that are fighting their niche fight, competing with everyone else for the extremely small amount of funds that are flowing through philanthropy to this collection of environmental organizations. Well, we've gone beyond that. The environmental movement is, for all intents and purposes, failed. We need an ecological movement that recognizes, and not even a movement, the word movement is wrong, is too limiting. We need people to wake up very fast. And that's very difficult given that the mainstream juggernaut, which is a collection of politics and media and money. Money should have come first. Money runs the show. And money does not want us individually to see that money, is using us for its own reproduction. What do we all do? We work. Why do we work? For money. We work for money. Oh yeah, oh right. There's so few people who work for love or for commitment or for, you know, they work for money because that's what you got to pay the groceries. So we have 99% of humanity working for money in one form or another, and we've got 1% of humanity working to try to repair the damage that money's doing. And so we have the greatest irony of all times, which is we're destroying the Amazon rainforest, in the process of making Amazon.com the #1 mercantile establishment on earth.
Oh my God. I love that you put those two things together, and I had not done that.
Yeah, they're directly related. That's the thing.
Deep irony.
Yeah, I mean, it's the supreme irony. Yeah. So where were we?
May I continue my question?
Please.
Okay. So I the first time I got to know your work, your moniker was UPFSI, I believe.
Yeah.
And what that meant, I've forgotten what those initials mean, but it was a kind of an interface between people of faith, people from different faith traditions, and science. Is that safe to say?
That's a good synopsis. So the initials stood for United Planet, Faith and Science Initiative. And the United Planet was meant to be an analog of United Nations, but without borders.
Yeah.
Okay, so upfsi.org, O-R-G.
Yeah. So, that was impressive on its own. That got me in. I signed up, let me see what this guy's doing. This looks great. And it was just about the same time that the Pope released his now famous, or now fully forgotten encyclical, which is one of the most extraordinary documents I've ever read. Yeah. And I have the least admiration of any religion. I have the least for Catholicism. So it's something for me to speak as highly as I have been about this Pope since the encyclical was written. Mm-hmm. But I saw through the just flatline reaction around the world to that extraordinary document, even amongst Catholics. So maybe instead of a one-day news cycle for it, it might have had about a week.
No, it was a little bit longer than that, but your reference to news cycle is very apt. Human beings, by nature, we are attenuating mechanisms.
Yeah.
We filter information out, so we forget very quickly. But Laudato Si is still plugging away, but not the level it should be.
But in terms of where you were just talking, in terms of, really where the leverage is, where you've landed, certainly where my attention has landed in terms of directing activism energy through the work that I do and so on, it is all about the money. We are economics. And there's a portion of the book that I'm putting out fairly soon in which I assert that the defining narrative that the business as usual paradigm has adopted is actually the corporate charter. Mm-hmm. That, it would be swell if we had some sort of more personal, more kind of home-based, family lineage kind of defining narrative. And I'm asserting, no, we don't. We have all forfeited all the nice kind of homey feeling defining narrative, and what we by default have taken on is the corporate narrative.
Yep.
And there is no more potent place if anyone hopes to get traction or leverage in this conversation. So I'm just basically looping around to validate what I heard you saying. And does that spark you to say anything more?
Well, yes. We are humanity. We tend to manifest reality as the stories we tell ourselves. They become self-fulfilling. So if we tell ourselves that we are, the best thing that ever happened, then we accumulate an egocentric reality around us, such as the current liar in chief of the United States. So the narrative is critical, and unfortunately the narrative is dictated. I don't even go as far as saying the corporate level, because I think the corporations are enslaved to something higher, something that's calling the shots on the corporations. And I refer to it as the meme of money. That money has become a regime that dictates what humanity does. It dictates what the banks and the bankers do. It dictates what the corporations do. It has written itself into law. There's a two-word formula called fiduciary responsibility that makes it against the law for the head of a corporation to make an ethical or ecologically sound decision if it reduces the profits. So yes, if what you're doing is against the law, well, you shouldn't do it. But if it's legal, even if it destroys the Amazon rainforest, it's your responsibility to do it in order to make more money, in order to make. So we are serving the reproductive function for this viral thought form called money. And I try to refine the way I explain that to people all the time, because once you get it, that you don't own your money, it owns you, then things begin to make sense and a path emerges to abandoning that narrative and taking up another one. Now, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit late for us to be saving ourselves through a new narrative, but we must try nonetheless. We have to establish a more accurate narrative of what's going on in the world, if only to make these next years, perhaps decades, a little bit more comfortable and understanding for the victims of our success.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if you could walk us through whatever your process has been like in terms of, if it's anything like mine, it's been a series of perhaps stepped awakenings, not just one big one, but a number of big ones perhaps, or a series. Mm-hmm. For instance, when I was midway through vetting the whole notion of abrupt climate change or abrupt anthropogenic climate disruption or chaos, when I was introduced to the notion of Arctic methane, mm-hmm. in permafrost,
smoking gun, or rather the gun going off. Yeah.
So that was a big, yet another big awakening for me. So are there any of that kind of stepped awakening moments or insights that really struck you and have moved you?
I'm sure there are plenty of them, smaller and larger. If you want me to remember a couple of them, mm-hmm. My seeing Al Gore's movie, the first one, Inconvenient Truth, was one of those that I finally realized that climate change was the big one. I'd always been supportive of the environmentalist agenda, shall we say, but seeing finally just how overwhelming in importance the climate dimension is. It was one of those oh shit moments. Excuse me, I'll avoid epithets since we don't want to get the FAA or the FTC, federal, which commission has oversight over cursing on air.
Yeah, it's the FCC. Yeah.
FCC, there we go. I don't want to get them.
You and I are both in trouble when my little podcast is scrutinized by the FCC. We're both done for.
Well, the mores of society have liberalized quite a bit, and I can say quite a few things before they actually object. So.
If I may, let's just tighten in a little bit on the detail of these kind of insight moments.
Okay. By the way, let me say on the Al Gore thing.
Yeah, please.
I worked with Al Gore for years. I'm still loosely related with his organization, the Climate Reality Project, but I find his messaging to be too middle of the road, too mainstream. And he is still a victim of the thinking that we can continue with the current economic growth regime
Mm-hmm.
and still save ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That we just have to grow green. And I think that's a basic misunderstanding.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's been my experience, not nearly as connected with that program as you have been, but that really, even in his movie, by the time the credits rolled, I realized exactly that this entire film, as beautiful as it was and as potentially potent as it was, really fell flat because of its obvious still being immersed in our culture. And
Yep.
so,
Buy a Prius, change your light bulbs. Those were the
yeah,
takeaways, you know.
right. If I could, I'd like to just mention that one of the big kind of shocking to me moments in writing my book, which I put out in 2017. It's called The Impossible Conversation. And after I vetted the climate change information, the abrupt climate change information, I also did quite a bit of looking into climate change denial. And I considered myself to be, something of a mediator, a skilled mediator, a skilled communicator, a skilled accumulator of knowledge and trainer. This is my first book I was writing, but I could put those skills to work. But everything, all of my skills, all of my abilities were challenged when I tried to find something admirable, something to respect about climate change denial. And I, to this day, I cannot find any piece of it that is worthy of anything but scorn and so on.
Well, it's just like asking, is there any socially redeeming characteristics to the devil,
Yeah, yeah. So my choice at that time in the writing of the book, because I couldn't slow down, I had to write the darn thing. I decided to shift my attention to, so where else is this business as usual human operating system, where else is it having this level of extraordinary impact? And it took me about 4 minutes on the internet to stack up more categories of impact than I could possibly have included in the book or in a lifetime of study. And as I'm sure none of these are a surprise to you, so our impact on the oceans and extinction of species and habitat loss and on it goes. I'm curious if there are any of those less climate related indicators of our impact that have also stayed with you and are heavy on your heart.
I've looked at the climate problem and the ecological problem from that's been my lens the last few years. And I went from climate to a general category of ecological stressors, in which climate is the big one, the one coming at us the fastest. But you can just say population, population is not caused by the climate problem, and the climate problem is in part caused by our unwieldy population, and the fact that there are still people who deny that, who say, oh, we could, and the World Wildlife Federation says that population is not the problem, we could feed 10 billion people. Huh? Yeah, sure, as long as you get rid of all the elephants.
Right.
As long, and I mean, you don't have to get rid of them in order to feed them, but guess what? When somebody goes out in Indonesia and wants to plant a new oil palm forest, mm-hmm. and an elephant herd comes marching through their new palm, guess who's going to be shot or poisoned?
Yeah.
Okay? So we are displacing, we have already displaced most of wildlife. I think the figure that I saw was, so this is, we're talking about one of those dimensions you just asked about. We're talking about human, the volume, the biomass of humans and our livestock, having gone from 2% of the biomass of the planet, the animal biomass, shall we say, the vertebrate biomass, from 2% about 100, 150 years ago, we've gone to 98% or something like that. You know, it's incredible shift that's happened. I don't know if I have those numbers correct, but you get the point.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly what I was asking for, and I appreciate that. I really was just asking what of this type of current event that's going on the planet, current indicator of our impact, which ones, you know, have grabbed you in a particular way. And I noticed that let me just share, if I may, a little bit about the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
It really, once I vetted this material, especially the abrupt climate change material, I realized that it was too late to try and fix anything or save anything. That really what I could best offer is just as much love and beauty and right relationship as I could muster, and just give and just put it out there.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I need to keep leaning into the aspects of this world that move me, that are precious in some way, that I can resonate with. And I've always been an ocean guy. You know, whenever I've needed to kind of recharge my inner batteries, so to speak, I have gone to the ocean or the desert.
Yeah.
And you know, to recently have the facts laid out. The projections are before 2050, we will have lost all the coral reefs on the planet, and all of the fisheries on the planet will have also collapsed.
Yep.
And that's in the wake of, we've lost 50% of the phytoplankton in the ocean, which provides half of the oxygen that you and I are breathing.
It's just, it's mind-boggling that you can say those figures and to think that they might not be shocking anymore to some people. You know, we know that, and then we become inured to the idea that, well, okay, we're killing off the reefs on the planet, so much for my snorkeling, you know, and so much for my, but it's like this, oh my God, that we could even kind of normalize that in our own thinking is bizarre. Anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. And Stuart, I don't know if you're aware, I can't imagine you're not. You were talking before about the biomass of wild animals compared to humanity and the livestock we've put in place. And there's this little, it's little only because I've seen it a couple of times and don't know much about it, but the notion of year zero is implied in a short video that I've seen recently on YouTube about the projected end of the curve, the downward curve of wild animal biomass on the planet. And that's by, I believe it's 2026.
Holy crap.
And that's the
I had not seen that term or that figure. I assume there will be some rare specimens kept in zoos, but what you're saying is we're looking at the end of most. Well, you know, let me say, even if there are a few renegade elephants out there that have not succumbed or submitted. Even if there are a few hippos left whose horns have not been, it's such a sin that on our watch, we could have allowed this to happen. But
Yeah.
what can you do? What can you do? I mean, it's the regime of money that's enforcing it. They are not productive assets. Get rid of them.
Yep.
They don't have a right to be here because they're not making anybody money.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I keep over and over trying to hold up a mirror to people to make them realize that that is what's destroying us. You know, in real estate, I had a realtor's license some years ago, a real estate salesperson's license. And there's a term in real estate called the best and highest use. And what it means is if you have a property, the best and highest use is the thing that will make you the most money. Excuse me? You mean the endangered species that's on my 100 acres of property in the wild Adirondacks? You know, is, yeah, get it out, get rid of it. You know, it's stopping you from making money. You know, it's like,
yeah.
Once money becomes the most important thing, it replaces, I hesitate to use the G word, it replaces God. It replaces the notion of the sacredness of life. So we don't have to use the word God. We can go to completely agnostic or atheistic terms of ethics and morality. It's a deep, deep sin against our own humanness to regard other forms of life as worthless unless they're worth money to somebody. And unfortunately, for some of these, they're worth the most money, skinned and having their hides tanned and skinned for rugs.
Yeah.
You know, what?
Yeah. Stuart, if you don't mind, I'd like to shift gears just a little. You know, given your where you get yourself in terms of these conferences, you know, the people you get to speak with and the scientists in particular, I'd like to.
Excuse me for laughing. My laughter is because I am, one of the things on my informal CV is I say that one of my greatest skills and assets is that I don't understand the meaning of the word no.
I get it.
So people have told me when I first got the epiphany, the inspiration that I was supposed to try to get the Pope to go to the climate talks or to get the attention of the Vatican. This was back in 2009. And people said, you can't do that. You can't get an audience with the Pope. Well, it took me a few years, but I had an audience with Pope Francis. I didn't have an audience with Pope Benedict, who was the Pope at that time, because you don't just go waltzing up and say, hey, I'm here. But, you know, I got James Hansen to come to his first COP ever after 22 years of saying that the COP is bullshit. He finally came to the COP and said, this is bullshit. It was amazing. You know, the video conference I did with, not the video, the press conference I did with him. My television programs are actually a repurposed press conference in UN speak. And I got James Hansen to come and sit, and he said, look, I can almost quote it verbatim. The leaders of nations, the world leaders, are going to come here on the last couple days of the COP, and they're going to clap one another on the back and say, we did good. We made an agreement. The problem is fixed now. If they do that, then they are, and he grips the microphone slightly and nervously, and he says, if they do that, then they are screwing the next generation and all coming generations. This is the world's most famous climate scientist, who, by the way, is unknown to most of the world, saying that our leaders are screwing us. And so come along Greta Thunberg, and she's saying that very directly to the leaders of nations now. You are screwing us, and we will not ask you to change because we know you won't. Or another synthesis, she says, I will beg you to change, but I know you won't.
Yeah.
So I'm begging the people to, I'm letting you leaders know that change is coming, like it or not, and I'm going to beg the people to go around you.
Yeah.
And the people is now the hundreds of thousands of youngsters who are striking from school one day a week, inspired by this saintly young lady.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for that anecdote. That's like dead on with where I was hoping to go. And if I may just kind of wiggle in between the lines with regard to specifically your times with various climate scientists. Mm-hmm. Something that I have a very strong sense of with the research that I've done, but I don't have nearly the personal contact that you've had. I wonder if you could say what your experience of the self-governing or self-limiting that climate scientists might be inclined to do given the pressures on them from academia, from corporate, from government.
Okay.
Are you aware of any of that? Do you get a sense
yes.
of that from time to time? And can you tell us about that?
Okay. I'll go to one extreme example, which is not the one that you mentioned, but it's related. And yes, there is pressure. There's pressure to get contracts. Again, money runs the show. Mm-hmm. If you're in academia, unless you are someone like E.O. Wilson, where you have your emeritus, Harvard gave him huge offices and staff for the rest of his life, and he can say pretty much what he wants. I don't think he's subject to much oversight in those terms, but then he does not go too far out of bounds, in which case, who knows, Harvard might get involved. If he denounced Harvard for their not divesting from fossil fuel, for instance, mm-hmm. you might hear about that. They might move him to smaller office, ... Mm-hmm. Okay. But that aside, and those things do exist. I don't know how rampant they are because I'm not in academia like that. I'll give you one example. There are two, I will call them climate scientists, even though they study a piece of the climate system. One is Dr. Natalia Shakova, and the other is Dr. Peter Wadhams. He's emeritus professor of ocean physics from Cambridge. She, last I knew, was research faculty at the University of Fairbanks, Alaska. Mm-hmm. She's Russian. Her family lives in Siberia, as far as I know. She very clearly has to watch what she says. Mm-hmm. She's also not famous. She avoids, for the most part, interviews. There are only very few examples of interviews of her that I can find. Mm-hmm. And one of them that was shared with me by a friend goes to a very interesting place that I'll mention in response to your question. She discusses how her colleagues, quote unquote, get their papers reviewed and published in the top journals, Nature, Climate, whatever, when they make ridiculously conservative estimations of the thawing of the permafrost and the methane release. Mm-hmm. And she tries to get her papers published, and the responses she get were, your data can't be right because it doesn't agree with our existing models. Mm-hmm. Huh? Your data doesn't agree with our models, so we won't publish your data. Mm-hmm. They're basically saying your 10 years of study is incorrect. Something's wrong. And so I have a 6-minute bit of an interview with her where she is very clearly irked, mild word, by that censorship within her field, that they won't publish her work. There's a favoritism that favors those who persist in the defective scientific narrative that the methane is not coming out because our models say it shouldn't be coming out.
Right.
And quote unquote top climate scientists in the world agree with that mainstream analysis. There are only a few who will break ranks, and those few are ostracized from the mainstream.
Got it. Yeah, she's extraordinary. I've only seen a couple of the videos that are available on YouTube of her as well, and she was one of the first that I saw. And it's ironic that there is so little from her since then. Anyway, so is it your assertion that this is rampant, that this is pretty much across the board?
I will not make a comment about how prevalent it is. I'm not in a position to do so. I only know that it exists, and I can speculate that there are more than just isolated examples of it, but I'm not going to go as far as saying it's rampant because I don't know. I don't want to overstate.
That's fair enough. I appreciate that. So I'd still like to keep asking you about your experience in COP or other situations.
We should take a moment and explain the acronym COP. I always, when I do my own television programs, I warn my guests that if they go with an acronym that's not common, then I'm going to stop them. And Jim Hansen was a little bit flabbergasted when I interrupted him a couple times until he got the fact that I was amplifying for mainstream.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Please.
Yeah. So the COP is an acronym for Conference of Parties. And in particular, the most frequent use is the Conference of Parties to the Kyoto Protocols, which is the climate talks. So when people say COP25 later this year, it's the 25th meeting since 1992 of the Conference of Parties to the Kyoto Protocols. And I'm sorry I have to denigrate the COP, but I view it as a ritual in kicking the can down the road. It's useless in terms of our fixing the problem. Because it's run by the mainstream economic interests. Okay, it's okay. So there are other COPs though. There's a Conference of Parties to the UN Conference on Biodiversity, UNCBD. And so that's a different COP, and that happens every second year, and it's totally ignored in the press, almost totally. Nothing comes out of that one unless some paparazzi paparazzi is the media, unless some celebrity goes, like if Prince Charles turned up at the UNCBD meeting, then it might get some press. Yeah. So that's what the COP is. It's the meetings where representative of governments get together ostensibly to try to fix the problems, but I feel that it's disingenuous.
Right, and just case in point, this last COP in terms of climate change that you attended in Poland was, in fact, the senior sponsor there was the coal industry in Poland. So, kind of get the idea that you're pointing at of just how ridiculously encased in the business as usual human operating system this is.
If I can tell another little anecdote, the president of the host nation gets to make a speech on the first day. So the president of Poland, idiot that he is, his speech contained words to the effect, we have 200 years worth of coal left in Poland, and we have the right to and the intention to burn it all. And later, a member of his press corps, the Polish press corps, challenged him saying, if we continue to burn coal the way we're doing, then we will all be dead. You know, it'll be the end of humanity within 100 years, to which he replied, well, then we'll burn coal until we're all dead. Pause. Ooh. Yeah. So that's what we've got. That's what we're up against. So now, if you want, we can cut to the chase, because after people hear that, and after people where are we headed? And unfortunately, the way my work is turning, I am beginning to turn from the idea that we can mitigate, that we can fix the problem. And I'm even beginning to turn away from the idea that we have to focus on our adaptation to the climate change that's already in the pipes, to seeing that there is a very strong case that can be made that we will drive ourselves extinct within the next decade or two. And I won't go into the details of that case, but the methane release has a lot to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And this view that humanity may go extinct this century, within the next few decades possibly, is a position that's held by some in the US military and intelligence community as well. So this is not fringe stuff.
Yeah, well, this is going to be no huge surprise to anyone who's watching this podcast. So I appreciate your being, a bit delicate with it, but I don't think delicacy is necessary here.
Okay.
I of course would like to pause there, because one thing I left out in my original words, that we opened up with today, in acknowledgement of you, is you and your team have some just remarkable skills amongst you. And one of them is to produce some just wicked good video. And
Thank you.
The piece that you put together for Jem Bendell's monologue was just exquisite, because I'm a body surfer from way back.
Oh, can I tell the story about that one?
Yeah,
little anecdote.
Yeah.
When he first came out with his paper, and I would recommend, let me insert, please, the audience that's listening, go to scientists, plural, scientistswarning.tv, which is my YouTube channel, or it refers you over to the YouTube channel, and search within my videos for deep adaptation, and you'll come up with two. And the second one, or the one that'll be higher if you're displaying newer first, is an interview I did with Jem Bendell. And it was the first video interview he did. He did one interview before that for a podcast. And then he basically turned me down for an interview. He said, I'll get in touch with you when I feel I'm ready, but I have to sit with this for a while. And in December, in November, he contacted me and said, I can do one with you on December 3rd. I said, can't, the COP will be going on then, and I can't do anything but COP when the COP's happening. So we did it on December 1st, the day before the COP started. And he was in Indonesia at the time. Mm-hmm. And so it was very poor bandwidth, and it was a sepia tone video from his side almost. So I put it up in a folder, and one of my two, at that time, video editors took a look at it and came up with this absolutely sublime edit of it, made it look like a 15-minute Hollywood-produced movie. I thought it was so good. And that became that was an interview, but none of what I said or asked was important. So it was all left out. Fine.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, just a brilliant job. And I will, of course, put the links to everything that we talk about in this conversation in the show notes beneath this particular episode.
Yeah.
And why I brought it up in the first place, and thank you for that anecdote. It's you got a great team. That's all I can say. Please relay.
And I don't pay anybody.
Of course.
There's one person who helps me with Twitter sometimes, and I give him some money. He's an older fellow like myself, and he's not making that much money now, and he's brilliant in what he does. So I like to support him a little bit, but put it this way, nobody is on payroll. Nobody. Everyone's volunteer. And
I understand.
It's important because once you allow money in the door, then money asserts its influence in insidious ways.
Yeah, well, it can. I don't know that I'm with you on the extremities.
Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily do that, but it can. And if only because then you start developing what they call a nut, that is a monthly or an annual expenditure, and then you have to fundraise for that. And then you have to put together fundraising packages that meet the profiles of the funders that are out there. So you begin to, you know.
I'm with you. I understand well the point. And really where I wanted to go was kind of the progression that you're pointing to. It's rare and it's good that you and I can easily share almost a shorthand in our conversation, because I'm very familiar with some of the steps that you just kind of breezed us through, that many people might not quite get, because it takes something to be engaged in this conversation in the way that we do.
Yeah.
And to position ourselves, having landed ourselves in a particular point of view or point of reference in our experience about what the hell is going on this planet. What is humanity actually doing, and what is really coming at us, and at what speed is it coming? These are vitally important choices that we make about where to position ourselves and how to interpret the various signals that we're getting.
I got to answer those because you just stated that as questions. And I got to answer those questions for your listening audience immediately. We have launched a scorched earth campaign against life on Earth, where we are poisoning and killing by gun and violent means, and by climate change, by overheating the environments in which life has evolved over millennia, over eons of time. And we are changing it so rapidly that species cannot evolve quick enough. Trees can't move as fast as the climate is warming. Animals caught on a mountain will move uphill as they seek the band of temperatures that they're familiar with, that they can survive in, until they are basically extincted off of the top of the mountains. And we are doing this with lightning speed. We are doing this in, you can say, in the last 150 years, and it's going exponential. And what that means is it's accelerating all the time. And so we are killing life on Earth. Guess what? We are included in that. We are killing ourselves and all of life on Earth, and the end may come in as soon as a couple of decades. And a lot of your listeners will be incredulous about that, which is why I encourage them to watch the videos, study up on the methane release, because that is the gun going off. Okay, there's something that the US military and intelligence community is looking at called a BOE, a blue ocean event. And they expect the blue ocean event in the Arctic to come within the next 5 years. And at that point, it's all over. Okay, because at that point, the methane release from the Arctic will proceed apace. What that means in terms of time frame, who knows? But I guess, as I say, the US military is concerned about that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And that's what you've just said is absolutely consistent with my first book, The Impossible Conversation, the entire body of work on the website, and the soon to be released on-demand learning components that people are invited to partake of. And
if you would, if we can go through those learning components, I assume it's a tutorial kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then we might appreciate your allowing us to post them or post links to them on our scientistswarning.org website, because we're trying to create that kind of media or harness that kind of media when it's been created, so people can bring themselves up the learning curve.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I will be shipping you off all the informational, prelude to that in the coming weeks. And to get back to the original loop we started just a few moments ago, mentioning first what obviously you and I have had at some point quite a while ago now, the woke moment of, oh, this is the real deal. Wait a second. Let me hear that again. That kind of a thing.
Yeah, the oh shit moment.
And, right. And that kind of initial awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the thing that we can not unsee.
Mm-hmm.
That moment.
Mm-hmm.
Then you mentioned another word, which I think that Jem Bendell may have just coined the sucker, about deep adaptation. The idea of, he certainly didn't coin adaptation,
No.
which to me looked like a way of surrendering. If first really the hope was, okay, let's now have mitigation conversations, as
Mm-hmm.
if we can fix and adjust and bring ourselves to some kind of a sustainable development level of humanity.
Yeah.
And so, we're clearly past that. And those are hollow and toxic terms as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Then to get to the mitigation and the sincerity that people may or may not have had in trying to have those conversations, hence 20 plus years of COP meetings with virtually nothing to show for it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get to the adaptation, which is, as far as I can tell, just a surrender to, okay, so it's going to go bad. How do we adapt?
No. Yeah, I want to cut the surrender part out. Early on, when the problem was approached, albeit disingenuously, it was the territory was divided up into mitigation. Let's try to fix it. Adaptation. Let's adapt to what we can't fix.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not a surrendering to anything. It was just being realistic and saying, okay, it's going to get hot. It's going to get dry. There are people whose livelihoods are going to be destroyed. What can we do to help those people who, by the way, are the least responsible for creating the problem? And that led to finance things and balking on finance things and finance agreements that were not adhered to, and all of the above. And basically, it's the equity piece that, hey, United States, Great Britain, you guys created the frickin' problem,
Mm-hmm.
and we're suffering from it. You got to help us. If you want to have an international treaty, and one of the problems with the UN treaties is that everybody's got to agree. So you have Saudi Arabia saying, sorry, no, I don't agree with that. And Saudi Arabia rules the day.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone can veto. That makes it very hard to get a strong agreement, albeit agreement at all. So adaptation did not originally connote we are surrendering ourselves to anything. We're just being realistic. Unfortunately now, to those of us who really study the problem, we may have to surrender in the sense that we have to kind of give up the illusion that we can turn it around. So we prepare, brace for impact,
I'm with you. I am with you in everything except for this place where we just have different terms and different ways of relating to the terms.
Okay.
For me, the adaptation point is absolutely one of acquiescing to the powers that be that control the narrative from top to bottom. And what there became was just, it was obvious we needed to call it something where we were doing what we could, given we're not going to stop using fossil fuels. We're not going to stop our business as usual ways in any way, shape, or form. So what we get to do is adapt. And
I'll accept your framing. We can talk about that offline, maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not repeating it to be righteous about it. I just wanted to be clear that there's a different stance.
Yeah.
So we've walked ourselves along this path with the different terms that have shown up along the way to what we can call our efforts at any one of these steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate and enjoy Jem Bendell's use of deep adaptation, meaning on an individual level. And whether it's your interpretation of the word adaptation or mine, what it amounts to is really an existential level and a deep truth level for each person, perhaps a spiritual level, mm-hmm. at which we grapple with what is actually so.
Yeah.
Really matters not much at this point how we got ourselves here or who was to blame. What matters is this spiritual reference point at which we sit.
Yep.
And I'm curious, is there anything different to you now in this place in the conversation, in this place in this trajectory that you've been so attentive to for so long? How is it different now?
Oh yeah, there's a difference. It's a big difference. You know, up until recently, I was able to continue with my particular brand of activism, blindering myself, intentionally not acknowledging the possibility that it could be too late. Because I felt that, as Greta says, that even if it's too late, and even if there's no hope, we still have to act, because when we act, hope is everywhere. And it's yes, we have to act. And I also don't completely discount the fact that even though it looks increasingly like we are going extinct soon, there is always, when I used to teach probability and statistics, I would tell my students that no event is 100% certain mm-hmm. unless it's happened. And they would protest once in a while. I'd ask them, tell me something that you are 100% sure will happen. They said, well, the sun will come up tomorrow. I said, well, first off, that's not true, because the sun doesn't come up. Okay, so that's 0% that the sun is going to come up. But if we agree that you mean that the earth will continue to rotate, well, it's not 100% because you may die overnight, in which case the event didn't happen from your perspective. Okay, and that's all we can do. Or there might be a nuclear war overnight. Or the sun might fly apart for some reason our scientists don't know. It's not 100% certain until it happens. Point made.
Yeah.
It's not 100% certain that we will go extinct as long as we haven't gone extinct. And my spiritual conviction is that if enough of us do what's conventionally called repent, change our ways, if we are contrite, and we realize on a societal level that we've screwed up mm-hmm. big time, and if we can start in another direction, if we can depose the regime of money, and we can operate on a different level, who knows what mercy we might encounter. It could be as simple as some kind of bacteria or zooplankton that sequesters carbon, that just goes nuts in the ocean, starts eating up all of the plastic, combining it with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, dying and falling to the bottom, and all of a sudden that plastic becomes our salvation because there's so much of it out there. And who knows? But we have to do our part. So excuse me, I'm going to fall apart again here. Not fall apart, I'm going to weep. So we have to do what we can. And yeah. It's incumbent upon me to continue to message in the way I message, that even if it looks very, very bad, we still have to try to figure our way out of this one. We have to, at the same time that we love nature more, that we love our families more, that we respect one another, that we, at the same time, and the solution, the solution to climate change is so simple. Again, like Greta says, she says in one of her talks, or many of her talks probably, that people tell me, she did this at the climate talks, people tell me that I should study and become a climate scientist so that and she puts up her fingers in the quote signs so that I can solve the climate crisis. And this is a 15-year-old girl at the time who was so smart and so wise, and who is so not scripted. She writes all of her own stuff. She learns very quickly. And she says, the climate problem has already been solved. We already know what we have to do. The problem is we're not doing it. So we've already solved the problem. Now we need to implement the solution. And that requires our taking our foot off the pedal of industrial society and putting up with the fact that not every company can grow its earnings year to year, and not every CEO is going to earn more next year than he did, and we don't have to have the top of the company earning 15,000 times the salary of the bottom of the company. All of these injustices need to be fixed if we're going to survive. And many people don't even see them as relevant to our survival.
Yeah.
We've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But we can go quickly. We can go quickly.
So, Stuart Scott, this last response that you've laid out is a perfect ending. It showed us the depth and availability of your heart. And
I'll have a good cry after we hang up.
And I got to say, I'm just proud to call you a brother in this.
Please, please. Call me anything you like, just don't call me late to dinner.
I also just look forward to what you and your team keep bringing forth in an just obvious, heartfelt, gracious presentation of service every time you post what you post.
Yeah, thank you.
These are times that are calling for the best we can possibly muster so that we can call others to the best that they can possibly muster. And I see you doing that. I know I'm committed to doing that. And I look forward to many, many other times when we can get together and share what each of us is up to. And I just want to thank you for all the people who may not know who is the guy that's doing this stuff and putting out these videos they happen to see. I want you to know that I see you and deeply appreciate your work. Please pass on this acknowledgement to your other members of your team.
I will.
And thank you.
If I can have one final word.
Of course.
I think part of the problem that we've created is because we approach the world too much with our head, with thought, and not enough with our heart. And in spiritual terms, the soul, the spirit resides in the heart. When I first got seriously into metaphysics and spiritual fourth way study, I was told that if the mind were treated as the slave and not the master, and the heart were the master, that we would not have the problem that we've got.
Yes.
So, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your heart.
Okay.
Stuart Scott.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you next time.
Yes. Take care.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.